You're listening to the Scaling Culture podcast, where we sit down with thought leaders who share their experiences building incredible workplace cultures. Our guest today is Yetta Toliver, Global Head of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging at Xerox. In today's changing, connected world, it's important for Xerox to be committed to advancing diversity, inclusion, and belonging, or DIB, to enable innovation and growth. In her role, Yetta leads the DIB strategy and roadmap to help Xerox to drive change and build a more diverse community within the company and the communities they serve. Yetta is a servant leader at heart. In 2013, she established the Journey of Leadership Institute, and she also works as a business adjunct professor at a local community college. In this episode of Scaling Culture, Ron and Yetta discuss why and how Xerox created employee resource groups in the late 60s, what have been the outcomes of that initiative, and where can other companies start, Xerox's diversity, equity, inclusion commitments and key initiatives, and why and how to listen to what's important to your employees. Before diving into today's episode, though, our team would like to share an observation. That number one challenge in hybrid and virtual workplaces is building relationships. We all think that people know by default how to build trust and how to sustain strong relationships, but unfortunately that is not always the case. Be sure to check out a sample of our 1-hour series on building relationships at scalingculture.org, and don't forget to rate the podcast. Now, on to the show.
Welcome to another episode of the Scaling Culture podcast. I'm your host, Ron Lovett, and today, all the way from Dallas, Texas, we have Yetta Toliver with us. Yetta, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ron. It's my pleasure to be with you today.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. Xerox is a big brand, and so when it showed up, I was like, oh, wow, this is great. We've not had anyone from Xerox, and especially holding the title of Global Head of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging at Xerox. This is the first time I've heard "and belonging." Can you, what was it always like that, or was that added later? Tell me about the word belonging getting into diversity inclusion.
Well, thank you so much for the question, Ron. Diversity and inclusion was been part of Xerox landscape for some time. In fact, in 1990s, Xerox was recognized for being a leader of diversity. As we move forward and as evolutions changed in the space with diversity and inclusion, we did embrace inclusion. But as we looked in refocusing inside of diversity and inclusion and looking through the lens of diversity, inclusion, belonging, there was a great alignment with our culture values. And as we talk about our company culture values, we wanted to ensure our employees' voice was heard. They had a place that they can lean in and be a part of. And belonging was just a great fit for that. So we chose to focus on diversity, inclusion, and belonging during 2020 with all of the social unrest that was going on globally after the killing of George Floyd. We did shift and changed our focus to include belonging.
I love that. It's funny. It when I read it, when I hear it, it's soft. It's softer. It just seems it lands better. What a nice ending, right? Because diversity and inclusion just for some reason lands a little transactional with me. And then adding this word belonging, I think really adds this kind of compassion piece. It's really nice. And so let's go down the path. How, you mentioned in 1990, the company was recognized. What were they doing right? What were the behaviors that were getting that right way back?
Well, it kind of, like, we have to take it further back to what started in the late 1960s with our CEO who was in place, Joe Wilson, at the time. It was in the US. The way the cultural climate was, it was the Civil Rights Act was put into play, but it took a lot of unfolding to put that into action, especially for corporate America. The Blacks working at Xerox at the time did see the need to ensure that they were being recognized for their talents, being able to see promotions. So the groundwork started actually in the late 60s. By 1970, Xerox was very progressive around affirmative action program. But yet once the Black employees were hired, they saw serious problems. There was discrimination. They were being excluded. So they decided to form together and create the caucus groups, which today we're going to talk a little bit more about, I hope. Employee resource groups is what they're called today, or networks. So by the 1970s, as these groups were being formed, they were more self-care groups, and they were designed to help develop and train the minority employees in management positions. They also helped with doing a lot of policy changes. Because of that work, Ron, that started in the 70s, that built the platform to help Xerox to be lifted up, to be recognized for diversity. So by 1990, Xerox in corporate America was seen as the leader of diversity. That's how we got started. We continued to expand our focus, not just on minority employees. We started looking at what we can do to help to elevate women and grow women, especially in our technology space at Xerox. And that's really what helped us to grow to be seen then in the 90s as the leader of diversity. So that's how we got started.
Wow. And so you've already done a bunch. What's next in that journey? I know we are going to unpack SRG. Sounds like a big, important part of that plan, but what's next? You've done so much. Is it like hold the line, or no, we've got more work to do here?
Oh, we have much more work to do. We are still continuing to move forward in our industry to ensure that we're being recognized with other tech companies for the recognition of women when we look at our balanced workforce opportunity globally, to have more women in management and executive level positions. We're doing good, but we could definitely do better. So we have a 5-year strategy plan to really get us to where we should be in our industry, as well as when we look at our ethnicities within the US, we have an opportunity to really grow in that area as well, to get more underrepresented talent. We've expanded our scope there. It's just not ethnicities, Ron, when we talk about underrepresented talent. We're talking about veterans. We're talking about those with disabilities. We're talking about LGBTQ plus community. We're also looking to see what we can do in countries where our employees can self-identify in those various social identities. For example, Canada. If in Canada, our employees there are able to self-identify in their sexual orientation, so we can see the population of our LGBTQ plus community and know who is available to move and monitor them into promoting them into those various management and upper management positions. Even our applicants, we can track and monitor because they too can self-identify. And we can do the same type of self-identification to help us know how to move our talent, as well as our applicants in the UK. So in countries where we're safe to do it, we're continuing to do that. So that's one place we're growing. And we definitely are driving inclusivity, a safe place to talk about relevant issues and share experiences. This is so important as we move forward. And we just talked about that whole belonging piece. We need to continue to allow our employees a space to feel safe.
And what, from your perspective, have you seen as the outcome of these initiatives and strategies? What are the outcomes? Is it, wow, as we've got more diversity, there's more different thought, and so we're having better, stronger debate, and so therefore we're getting better results, more innovation? What's happening?
Oh, definitely. The research has shown, and we definitely have a lot of evidence around that. We've seen what it can happen when it comes to the bottom line as we talk about it, and the potential for revenue growth. We've seen the diversity in thought, as you mentioned, to help push our better products and services out to the marketplace.
But yet, back to revenue growth, is it because it's important to customers and that you're talking about this, and that you guys are doubling down, and where do you get the revenue growth from there?
Well, absolutely. Our customers are interested in us. We have this term we say in the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging space. Companies need to walk the talk. Yeah. I'm going to take us back a little bit, Ron. After the killing of George Floyd, many companies globally all said they wanted to do better in this space where they could. Yeah. But a lot of companies did take on the commitment to do something, stated the pledge. But now it's time to take action. Xerox is one of the companies that took action to say we need to do more because we were already in diversity and inclusion, but what can we do more? So we have seen the ability to help us because we have a lot of our companies want to know what are we doing to represent our supplier diversity when it comes to our spending money. Are we spending money and with the underrepresented types of businesses that can help us in this space as a supplier? And also, what are we doing as far as our products going to service? And also, what are we doing with our employees? And how are your employees aligning with the various diversity actions we have in place? So they want to come in and they're asking us, what is our representation of our board? What is our representation of our executive leaders? And we put this information in our corporate social responsibility report. And we are openly sharing what of our balanced workforce numbers look like globally. What do our representation looks like in the US, since we are a US company, and we're sharing that information out. And our customers are looking at us to see how we're doing in that space. So it helps us when we're doing it. And a lot of them are very interested. I have been a part of conversations with some of our customers in sharing out our story, sharing out what we've done with our employee resource groups and how they contribute in helping us in our day-to-day business operations, as well as what do they do to help us with our employee retention as well as our employee engagement.
It's interesting. One thing that really jumped out was that you guys, I'd say, take a holistic view at this, because you also mentioned you think about this and you apply your strategies when it comes to hiring suppliers. And I haven't heard anyone say that before. And I certainly haven't thought about it from that lens. I think that's very, very wise and interesting that you guys it's not just about your internal, you've talked about board roles, you've talked about external suppliers. I mean, you guys are really taking a holistic look at inclusivity, diversity, and belonging.
Absolutely. Because one of the things we do, and we also include it in our corporate social responsibility report, is our supplier diversity spend. And it is focusing in on, how many of your supplier are women, how many are minorities, how many of them are veterans. So we do report out on, how we're engaging them and how we are going out and getting their support. Some of the work we do with our in the government space, they do have that requirement. So some of them, even to contract in our government space, they're looking for us to partner with suppliers that are a part of that population. So it's important. We can, probably look and say we can do better, we can do more, but that is something that we continue to ensure that we're aligning to, and we're bringing that type of contribution on. Because when we talk about diversity, you're right, it's diversity among what we're doing in our employee space, what we're doing to support our products and services with that diversity of thought, because this is a reflection of the communities or the markets in which we serve. We even consider when we go out in our communities to do our volunteer work, having that reflection of what diversity looks like, as well as when we talk about where we're doing our spend with supplier spending.
Wow.
It is very holistic, Ron. It is a very holistic approach.
I'm curious, it sounds quite intentional, robust. I mean, holistic, absolutely. So when it comes to suppliers, is it, because, when you talk to companies, a lot of companies out there that are really trying to drive diversity inclusion, the strategy starts on the ask, i.e. I'm looking for employees. And so I cast a very wide net. I'm intentional about putting my ad in certain places. Is it the same strategy for suppliers? And so it's like, look, we need to really work hard to find more diverse suppliers. Is that kind of the starting point?
It is. And we actually have, there was my prior role before I started leading global diversity, inclusion, and belonging. I was working in compliance as the contract compliance director in the government, healthcare, and education space. And one of my peers, that was actually his role, intentionally seeking out these types of partnerships that we can go after. Because for Xerox being a federal contractor, it was important to ensure we had a healthy pipeline pipeline of this type of business relationships. So that was a part of his constant role, was ensuring that we had suppliers, very diverse, if I can use that term again, set of suppliers to do business with. So depending on what was the need that that was a part of that agreement with that customer, we wanted to ensure that we had a partner that would reflect that need, and we can be able to bring them on board. So it's definitely a very aggressive approach in how we do it and ensuring, because we want to make certain that we can meet that need.
And in some cases, you must have to make a tough choice. So I'm just envisioning you go to market, you're trying to find a certain supplier, but they just aren't meeting the requirements based on, I don't know, safety, or they're not there from a business perspective. And so, I assume, and maybe I'm wrong, does the business decision and win over that, or are they equal? It
all depends on what we're going after. And first of all, we're going to ensure that we got the right partner, because again, our brand and reputation is on the line. So we have fully vetted to ensure that that partner is going to meet the need and be able to support us. So there is a very solid vetting process as we bring them on board.
Right. So you've done the upfront homework. Let's vet, make sure if you're at the table now, let's get some pricing. Let's talk about this.
Absolutely. That's exactly how it works. So we know that they can deliver. They have been proven. We know that they're a good partner to have. So it's just a matter of then let's negotiate and move forward from there, and understanding, what their role would be and how they would support those requirements that are set forth in the agreement with the customer.
Yeah, great. And let's flip to ERGs. That's a big part of this. Can you explain to the listeners what is ERGs? Where did it start with you guys, and where is it today?
Oh, absolutely. So again, just a little bit of walk down memory lane. Employee resource groups, going back to the conversation I was saying earlier, started for Xerox in the late 60s, and actually standing up the very first caucus groups by 1971. And the whole purpose of the caucus groups then was, again, to ensure that they were able to develop and train minority employees for management positions. They were definitely a self-care group and cutting edge.
So they were looking internal. So internal minorities, et cetera. And let's get you ready, set for management. So what did that look like? It's like,
back and again, let's set the stage. Back in the 1970s, coming after the affirmative action programs were in place, right? We had the it was passed that we needed to now look at how to take that program and activate it inside of companies. But what was actually going on, that the Blacks working at Xerox at the time did not see any upward mobility happening. So they wanted to ensure that they developed and trained the employees that were ready to move into those next level positions, as well as start creating a healthy pipeline to start bringing in other Black talents into Xerox. Another thing that they wanted to ensure to do is that there was going to be perpetuity, that their changes that they were going to put in place was going to be there for sustainability.
Right.
So they also influenced that policy changes to make sure that happened. So what they did, they were working regionally across the United States, establishing these independent support groups, training, promoting, and pushing to senior leaders. Here are the Black employees you need to promote upward. So it was very effective, but what they were doing was more regionally aligned. What they realized, if they came together to one single voice, they could be more powerful. So 7 independent support groups became one, because they were all regionally dispersed, became one, forming the National Black Employees Association. And that was and Harvard Business Review has written a paper that identifies them being the first caucus groups, which today, as we talk about employee resource groups, is that organization is still thriving and alive at Xerox today. In fact, this is Black History Month in the US, and they are facilitating, along with another group that's employee resource group Xerox has that's very unique, the Black Women's Leadership Council. So they're bringing out all programming, information to all of our Xerox employees globally that to participate in celebrating Black History month. And I'm wearing green today because we're celebrating each Friday one of the colors, black, red, yellow, green, a part of Black history. Those are the colors that resonate for Black history. So this is a part of what the employee resource groups started. In the 80s, we started forming even more, the Women's Alliance, focusing on women. We also formed our Galaxy group, focused on our LGBTQ plus community, Hispanics Association for Professional Advancement for our Hispanic Latinx community, Asians Coming Together for all Asians in our company. And we had the Xerox Leadership Association for all leaders that are aspiring to get to the next level. So we started with that group in the 80s and continue to form more coming into the late 80s and 90s. Our young professionals, next generation, because those are our employees that are ages up to 35. And then most recently, just before the pandemic, we stood up our Veterans Services Members Association. So we have 9 active, continuing to grow with more. This year, we're looking to create a new group that's focused on differently abled, our physical and hidden disabilities we want to make sure we have a safe place for them as well to recognize. So we're continuing to grow our employee resource groups. We have found them to be very effective for over 5 decades now, as you can see, really help push development and growth in our company.
I'm curious, Yetta, a few things. Is this a function of HR? Are these paid new roles, or is this done by committee? And so people just join these kind of committees, or how does it work?
Oh, great question, Ron. The way they are independent organizations that are sanctioned by Xerox. So some of our employee resource groups are incorporated. Some of them have their own foundation. So they're not
internal in some cases. It's not internal.
In some cases, they're not internal, but as Xerox supports them, and my role sits in HR, so they become supported by HR. We are tightly aligned in ensuring what their programmings have in place, that we do provide them guidance and oversight in their programs. But they do carry the disclaimer on their communications that they're independently sanctioned organizations. Again, you're talking about 50 years of history and how they formed and stood up. Very different for some companies that are standing up their employee resource groups or networks. Everyone does not function the same way.
Right.
So that's the way that ours are functioned at Xerox. So, but there is a governance. They get the opportunity quarterly to report out to our CEO, because each of our employee resource groups have an executive sponsor, someone that reports into the CEO. But every quarter they meet with him along with our CHRO and myself to come and present out their prior quarter, what have been their successes and progress that they've made, what they're looking for the upcoming quarter, and they identify anything that they need help with as well. But what's important is they talk about any business strategies that they may be involved with. Some of them are creating some ideas or concept that they'd like to bring forward to the executive committee. They're also helping us to recruit for talent acquisitions. When we have job postings, they're putting them out through their network to help to promote internal talent and sharing out the job openings, as well as externally in their communities, in their networks, if there's opportunity to bring in talent. So they definitely help in the talent acquisition space and talent development space, because some of their programming is around mentoring, upskilling, reskilling. So they do provide programmings that help, as well as they have a community tie. Each of our ERGs are aligned with a nonprofit, so they can go out and serve in the community, and that helps with our philanthropic arm. So they go in and I work with my peer that leads our corporate philanthropy function, and we ensure that if it's a matter of donating, they can use matching to help in that programming, or if it's going out to do here in the US, like Habitat for Humanities or if there's a Christmas toy drive here in the US, they help with that. And in other countries such as in Italy, there was a swimming marathon event that we gave to for time as well as for financial donations. So the ERGs pulled together to ensure that they participated in the swimming marathon event. So we do things as our ERGs lead various different community efforts as well. So they do a lot.
It sounds like a lot. That was a lot.
They're all volunteers.
Right. That was a lot to digest. That's a lot. So I want to go back to, I want you to put your advisory cap on for a second. So if you're on my board and you're going to advise me on where do I start? Because diversity inclusion is really broad, right? I mean, you had from George Floyd, boom, that became a hot topic. And now you have different Asian issues in different parts of the world, boom, hot topic. And so if someone needs a start, they don't have anything in place, what do you suggest? Where's the starting point?
Listen to what is important for your employees. And that's the place to start. If we go back to what happened in the 60s, as I said, when we started Black caucus groups in the US and inside of Xerox, the voice of the employees said, Black employees, I'm not being promoted. I'm not being recognized for my skills and talents. I need to make sure that that's happening, not just for myself, because I said it was a collection of individuals that came together. That was the need.
Right.
They came together.
Right.
And so that's the same thing. And as we look at now, talking about standing up a differently abled group, the voice of the employees saying, this is important. We have employees here, some have physical disabilities, some have hidden disabilities. We need to come together and form this self-care group to help them. Going back to what I said, our culture values are making sure that they have a place that they belong, giving them that community, a safe place to talk and share. And that's where you start.
Right. And I love that. But what's next step? So you get there, and let's rewind the clock, and you had, some of the Black employees that said, we don't feel that we're at the table. We're losing opportunity. We don't feel comfortable. What should a company do then? What does the next step? Because let's assume they don't have, and there's no external ERG group. How should a company tackle that?
Absolutely. And I'm going to share out one resource that I use, and her name is Amy Broadhurst, if I have it correct. She created this book called the ERG Handbook. Okay. And what she has in that book really helps to identify what you need to do. And it's about a business plan, right? You identify the need, as I shared. The employees have identified, they've come to the table, they say that there's a need, but you really need to put a formal plan around it, just like you would do a business plan. You identify what is the why behind it. Why do you need it? What's the vision statement? What's the mission statement? How are you going to support it? What are the resources you need to support it? Come in with a good list of the supporters. She did a great job in this book, laying out who needs to be a part of, almost saying, yes, I stand up, I'm going to help you, because you're going to need those resources to help you stand up and build a program. Once you get everything ready, you do need to present it to your senior leadership so they can get the buy-in and be able to say, yes, we'll be there, we'll support you. What's going to be the resources you need in people resources, as well as in financial resources. Making sure you have longevity. You want to create it to where it's going to have sustainability. It doesn't need to be something that is great today, but it's not going to be something that'll be needed tomorrow. So you want to make sure you lay all that out. And then once that happens, getting it chartered and supported by your executive leaders is definitely the piece that will ensure that you have sustainability with that resource group. So it models developing a business plan. And in the ERG handbook, that's a great tool for anyone that's trying to figure out how to get started. Being able to take a calendar and identify what are going to be your key programming events. How are you going to meet to ensure that you're planning for those activities? So she put together even how you would set up your employee resource group, your leadership team, who's going to take on what roles, because that'll be so important for you as well. So that would be the way I would encourage anyone who's trying to figure out how to get started in employee resource groups. And Ron, I will say it depends on the company. Some companies could be so small in size and they don't have the resources to do the individual employee resource groups, as I laid out what Xerox has already in place. They may just have a smaller group. Some are coming together and they're bringing all different ethnicities together into one group, calling them multicultural groups. Some of them say, let's call inclusive groups, because these are the ones that are the underrepresented needs, and let's just put everybody together in one group and put together our programming that will highlight the key areas for each of these groups, such as for Black history, such as for Lunar Year, for Asians, and for Hispanic Heritage Month, for our Hispanic and Latinx. So they would pull their resources together in this inclusive group to be able to carry those programmings forward. So it all depends based on it works best for your employees, with their needs and the resources you have within your company. Because again, if it's a volunteer role, you do not want them to hit burnout. So that's so important. So you want to make sure that you have it organized to where there's not a lot of heavy lifting by those that are taking care of that programming.
Interesting. And as you look ahead, Yetta, and you think about, because again, a lot to digest. You guys have a very robust program when it comes to all these things, and I think that's excellent. But if you think of, because you said, look, there's still work to do. I guess culturally, when you think of where the company has been and where it's headed, especially post-pandemic, what are the things you're going to double down on in your culture at Xerox, and what are the things that maybe you're going to leave behind because you're going to update your values or update your culture? What are you, where are you going to double down? And what are some things that maybe it is time to change from a Xerox perspective?
Well, I can tell you where we're doubling down. And a lot of other companies and any of my peers that may be listening in this diversity and inclusion space is retention. The employee resource groups in their last quarterly review, the presidents all commonly came together when they went out and asked what's on the minds of their constituents in their individual groups, came back and said it's retention. We want to ensure the company is, we can help the company to retain talent. So and where they can help. Sorry,
I'm just going to say on that note, how has that been an impact? And I know there's so many factors to this, from compensation to, different motivational kind of levers that can be pulled in an organization. But has Xerox hit that great resignation? Have you seen a lot of turnover, or have these strategies said, no, everyone's holding tight, they're really happy? Like, what does it look like?
Xerox, from where I sit, much like any other company right now, is not immune to this great resignation.
Right.
It is impacting everyone. For the first time, and I've been in the employment space now for 35 years. I've been working for Xerox for 35 years.
Right.
So I have not seen the turnover be the way it is today, because for the first time, employees are in a position, whether they're active or passive job seeker, to go and get another job. There's just so many opportunities out there. So the retention, as we look at the resignation, that's what's one of the things that's impacting the retention. And people are just deciding, coming out of pandemic, they may want to just do something differently.
Right.
They're not in the same space they were before, Ron. So people are leaving. It may not even be just to do another job. It may be just to do something totally different.
But I think it's something to dig into for everybody, because, okay, some people are ready to retire. That doesn't count. You don't really, I don't think that impacts your diversity, culture, any of that stuff. That's someone's choice. Someone's decided to go look after a loved one and move somewhere else, and they had to be in head office. Fine, no problem. Someone's had this aha moment. I don't want to work here anymore. I don't want to do sales at Xerox. I actually wanted to be an accountant. And so I'm gone. So fine. I'd park all those. But there is this large group of just not happy. I'm just not happy here at this place. And so I'm assuming that, And again, happy is so broad. Why are you not happy? You don't like the lunch program, or is it we have a diversity inclusion problem? Like, people could be unhappy for different reasons. And I'm wondering if you're seeing, the impacts with that segment of the group. Are they staying because they're happy? And it's too risky. If I'm, in one of these minority groups or whatever it is that I understand that Xerox has worked so hard to make me feel included and make me feel safe. Aren't they going to think twice about leaving to go to, I don't know, Sharp or whatever the competitor is, to say, it's not going to be the same over there? Does that give companies a competitive advantage, or are employees taking it for granted and just kind of going to somewhere else? And I know it's broad.
Well, I will share this as it brings a smile to my face as I think about it. We have this event called All of Us Together, when we bring all of our employees together, and the ERGs help plan it for me. And it's a global event. And because global, we normally have to do 2 segments of it. There's such excitement when they come together. Those that participate in that event represent employee resource groups. They share out, they love that they work at Xerox, and they love sharing and talking about working at Xerox.
Telling stories.
We have a program in place to support our talent acquisition process, where members of the ERGs get an opportunity to talk with applicants as they're going through the process, to share out their career experiences at Xerox and what the culture is like as they're just going through applying for the job. I had an opportunity to just talk with a few of them that are participating in that program for over a year. And the number one common thing they all said, they love talking about working at Xerox. They love it. They love sharing that out.
Right.
Also, I just was on a call earlier this week with our Europe, Middle East, Africa group, the EMEA group. And some of the comments that were being shared was that people were saying yes to our job offers because they love the people at Xerox.
Right. So that is an impact. It is an outcome. And I think that's important, because the big business question objective is, what's all this for? Where does the business win? Because the business is its own identity, Xerox is its own thing, and there's people that work for it. And so it sounds like it's really winning.
It is really winning, and just excited about that, because when we talk about the evolution of employee resource groups, from where they started as caucus groups, also some or companies call them affinity groups, and they become this sense of family, this sense of community. So that's kind of what excites me about it. And that becomes a part of the staying power for employees. And that's one of the reasons why the employee resource groups presidents, they were concerned about the retention, and they were concerned about employee engagement, because what they want to do is keep people together.
Right. So the other side of the question, Yetta, what, as Xerox, as an organization, reflects, what is something, so we understand where you're doubled down on, is there any shifts or not? We're just doubling down and keeping forward, or no, there's this part of us we're going to leave behind now based on where the world is today? Well,
when I think about, because I'm just really focusing on where we could double down on and what we can do. And as far as any of the shifts, some of the things that we're talking about, not necessarily, it is a little bit of insight of what's going on inside of Xerox, but also when I think about my other practitioners in this space, is spending more time on the data, looking at the data, sharing out the data. I mentioned earlier, we do carry some data in this space for on our corporate social responsibility report. But what are we sharing out? Because as great as our what we're doing in our employee resource group space, as great as what we're doing in diversity, inclusion, and belonging space, that's one of the things, as you mentioned earlier, our customers are interested in. How well are you doing? Can you show us? So that's probably the other area right now that we didn't focus in on much, that we do. And that there's kind of a need there. As what is the data? How do you share out what you're doing here in this space?
That's interesting. Anything else that we haven't covered off that's in this space that is kind of keeping you up at night, or that you're excited about that we haven't talked about today?
Yeah, what keeps me up at night is really how can you do more? Because in this space, it's not a fluff, it's action. And what are the more actions we need to take? What is it that we need to do to ensure? Now I'm focusing for this year on inclusivity and ensuring that we have an inclusive culture. So what is the inclusiveness about? So really trying to focus and pushing that forward. We've gotten the diversity down. We spent last year really working on educating our workforce around diversity, making sure, because some people do not feel comfortable when you say the word diversity. So we want to make sure they were comfortable with being uncomfortable. So we kind of put some learning out there around unconscious bias, how to start reducing biases, doing certain training programs around that. So now I want to shift to really focusing on being an inclusive culture. But what does that look like? What are the actions we can put in place? And that is a part of what's keeping me up at night,
Right.
Ron, because we're at the beginning of the year and do want to set the stage right to move that forward, to create that environment.
And that's a big project, because those actions are like, oh, wow. I mean, Xerox is not just a small company with 5 people. This is a global brand. And so the actions, that's got to be like, okay, I've got to really take my time and have a lot of collaborative effort around those actions, correct?
Absolutely. And that's exactly where I am now, is really understanding.
You have a big whiteboard around you.
Yes, exactly. A huge whiteboard, jotting these things down, because one of the other things to be mindful of, Ron, Xerox is a global company. We're in 60 countries. And how I navigate through that is different from one country to the next.
Absolutely.
So I can't take a cookie cutter process, if I can use that phrase. I can't do that. I have to understand, right, what does it mean to be an inclusive culture in that particular country, right?
But that's interesting, because that keeps you close to the problems, right? I mean, you have to figure that out. You can't, we do this all the time in business. I catch ourselves at my in my company Vita all the time doing this. Is we collaborate and we think we're solving the problem. Then we say, well, let's go talk to the customer. Let's go talk to the stakeholders. Why we're not the stakeholder? We're not the customer. What are we even talking about here? It must happen sometimes in diversity inclusion. Because everyone has their own bias, their own thoughts of what they see versus going to the source and finding exactly what's going on in this area, in this region, because there's no global solution. This is a very complex thing, right?
It is very complex, but one of the things that it's like, it is possible, right? I'm a huge Olympics fan. I love watching summer and winter Olympics. So now here we have the Winter Olympics going. And one of my favorite pieces of the Olympics is when you have the parade of the nations come in. And everybody comes together. And even though there's some political concerns with the Olympics, for the Winter Olympics, but I do love when everybody comes together, even though they're still competing, right? Everybody's competing for those medals.
But there's no dirty looks, a lot of smiles at that, right? No one's
I tell you, even if it's one delegate, that one delegate is smiling coming through, right? Or if you have hundreds of delegates, that to me was resonating when you said they're all coming together, they're all under that one roof. So that I know it's possible. But what I love about it, when they're coming in, their flag represents who they are, their individualism, but yet they're still together. So they haven't lost their identity. And that's one of the things I strive for.
Well, great. Well, look, Yetta, thank you so much. This was great. And I've had some aha moments myself, and thinking about your strategy. I think, we've got some work to do as well, especially when it comes to the supplier side. That was not been on my radar. So thank you for that. And thanks for the work that you do. I think it sounds like you're making a wonderful impact in Xerox, and Xerox is making a wonderful impact on people. So thank you. And thanks for your time today.
Thank you so much, Ryan. It has definitely been a pleasure.
Hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to rate the podcast. For more information on Yetta, please follow her on LinkedIn. To check out a sample of our 1-hour series on building relationships, go to scalingculture.org. And if you're enjoying the Scaling Culture podcast, please share with others. We'll be back soon with another incredible guest.